The forest floor exhaled a damp, earthy breath as the investigator pushed through the final thicket of thorny undergrowth, the crunch of decaying pine needles underfoot, the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. Rain from the previous night had saturated the moss-covered ground, turning it into a spongy trap that clung to boots. But the clearing ahead held something far more unsettling than mud. Nestled against a moss-draped boulder, almost swallowed by the encroaching pines, was a 1994 Ford F-150 pickup truck. It wasn't abandoned. It was hidden. The vehicle's position, angled deliberately beneath a dense canopy of evergreens, suggested careful placement decades ago, not a random breakdown. Rainwater pooled in the rusted bedliner. But the tires, though flattened by time, showed no signs of being slashed or shot, an odd oversight for a vehicle supposedly used in a hasty escape. The official police report from 1994, filed after the disappearance of 16-year-old twins Emily and Sarah Vance, stated they'd taken this very truck to run away together, a narrative the small mining town of Blackwater Ridge had quietly accepted for 31 years. Yet the truck's condition contradicted that story entirely. The windows were intact, the cab clean of any personal effects or signs of a struggle. No food wrappers, no discarded clothes, no half-empty water bottle. Nothing to suggest a sudden, impulsive journey. The driver's side door was closed but unlocked. The handle pitted with rust. The interior faded to a dusty blue. Inside, the dashboard was empty, save for a thick layer of grime and a single, weathered pine cone. The registration papers, miraculously preserved inside a plastic sleeve on the sun visor, listed the twins' mother as owner, but the last inspection sticker was from June 1993, months before their disappearance. Why would two teenagers fleeing home, supposedly in a hurry, take a vehicle that hadn't been legally driven in over a year? The investigator ran a gloved hand over the truck's fender, feeling the deep, unnatural indentation beneath the rust, not the result of a tree branch or rock, but the distinct, rounded impact of a heavy object, possibly a tire iron. Kneeling, they examined the ground around the vehicle. The soil was disturbed not by weather, but by the precise, angled placement of the truck. The tire tracks leading to this spot were deliberate, not frantic. A careful survey of the immediate area revealed a single, incongruous object half buried in the moss near the rear wheel well. A faded blue cloth patch, its edges frayed, depicting a stylized pickaxe crossed with a gear. It was the logo of the Blackwater Ridge Mining Company, the very company that had shuttered its local operations just weeks after the twins vanished. The official narrative painted a picture of two troubled girls, making a clean break. This truck, hidden with almost surgical precision, told a different story, one of calculated concealment. A vehicle deliberately stashed to support a convenient lie. The rain began anew, a cold drizzle that seeped through the investigator's jacket. But the chill came from the realization that this wasn't an escape vehicle. It was evidence, buried for over 3 decades, pointing not to the twins' choice to disappear, but to someone else's decision to make them vanish. The patch, clutched in a gloved hand, felt heavy with implication. The mine wasn't just a location, it was the key, and the cover story had been carefully constructed around this very truck. The official record was a fiction, and the truth lay somewhere deeper in the earth, where the forest had tried to bury it. The Vance house sat at the end of a gravel road choked with overgrown rhododendrons, a relic of the town's mining boom now slowly surrendering to the damp, Appalachian air. The screen door groaned on rusted hinges, releasing a scent of aged wood, dust, and the faint, persistent tang of mothballs that clung to the twins' room like a preserved memory. Sunlight, fractured by decades of grime on the single window, illuminated motes dancing over a space frozen in 1994. 2 narrow beds, still made with matching floral bedspreads, flanked a shared nightstand bearing a pair of identical ceramic piggy banks. One cracked down the middle. The investigator's boots left faint imprints on the thin carpet, the only disturbance in a room untouched since the day Emily and Sarah vanished. On the wall, faded posters of The Lion King and a local high school basketball team shared space with a meticulously hand-drawn map of the Blackwater Ridge Mining Complex, pinned above a desk littered with textbooks on geology and ecology. The textbooks were pristine, unmarked, but the margins of a dog-eared copy of The Secret Garden brimmed with the twins' overlapping handwriting. Emily's precise loops, Sarah's bold, slanted scrawl, arguing over the meaning of a passage about hidden doors. A small, battery-powered radio sat on the desk, its dial permanently set to the local country station. The plastic casing yellowed with age. Beneath the bed, the investigator's gloved hand brushed against a shoebox filled with Polaroids. The twins grinning on a school trip to the mine's visitor center. Sarah holding a geode, Emily pointing at the entrance sign. One photo, tucked beneath the others, showed them standing beside a rusted mining cart, their faces half turned toward a figure in a hard hat, just out of frame. The figure's jacket bore the same faded blue patch found near the hidden pickup, the crossed pickaxe and gear. Mrs. Vance entered silently, her frame small beneath a worn cardigan, her eyes lingering on the beds with a quiet devastation that spoke of 31 years of unspoken grief. She didn't sit, instead, tracing the edge of a dresser with a finger, stopping at a framed photo of the twins in matching prom dresses, their arms linked. They weren't runaways, she said, her voice raw but steady, like stone worn smooth by a relentless current. They had plans. College applications on the desk. Sarah was saving for a trip to the Smokies with her biology class. She picked up a small, chipped porcelain angel from the nightstand, turning it slowly in her hands. They'd been arguing with the mine foreman, Mr. Hensley, about the water testing near their school. Said it was turning the creek orange again. He told them to mind their business. Her knuckles whitened around the angel. The night they disappeared, Emily called me. Not panicked, but strange. She said, "Mom, we found where they're hiding it." Then the line went dead. I thought it was static. The police said she was just upset, that she'd disconnected. She pointed a trembling finger toward the map on the wall. They'd been mapping the old service, tunnels behind the school, for a science project. They called it the Labyrinth. Opening a closet, she revealed two identical backpacks hanging side by side, their straps stiff with age. The investigator unzipped one, revealing a tangle of earphones, a half-melted pack of gum, and a small cloth-bound notebook. The pages were filled with neat, systematic observations, water samples collected on specific dates, sketches of machinery near the mine's perimeter, and timestamps of strange vibrations felt in their home at night. The final entry, dated the day before they vanished, read, "Saw Hensley at the old pump house. He was with men in black trucks. They were loading something heavy, not rock. Too quiet for rock." Below it, in Sarah's handwriting, circled twice, "Project Echo?" Mrs. Vance pulled a folded letter from her cardigan pocket, the paper thin as onion skin. It was a notice from the Blackwater Ridge Mining Company, dated 3 days after the girls disappeared, offering a gesture of goodwill for their unfortunate family situation. A check for $5,000, signed by the mine's owner. "I never cashed it," she whispered, pressing the letter to her chest. It felt like blood money. The room held its breath, the dust motes swirling in the weak light, the untouched beds a silent accusation against the town's narrative. The official story of two troubled teens fleeing a small-town life dissolved in the weight of this preserved grief, the meticulous records of curious girls, and the chilling implication that their curiosity had led them into something far darker than youthful rebellion. Mrs. Vance entered silently, her frame small beneath a worn cardigan, her eyes lingering on the beds with a quiet devastation that spoke of 31 years of unspoken grief. She didn't sit, instead, tracing the edge of a dresser with a finger, stopping at a framed photo of the twins in matching prom dresses, their arms linked. They weren't runaways, she said, her voice raw but steady, like stone worn smooth by a relentless current. They had plans. College applications on the desk. Sarah was saving for a trip to the Smokies with her biology class. She picked up a small, chipped porcelain angel from the nightstand, turning it slowly in her hands. They'd been arguing with the mine foreman, Mr. Hensley, about the water testing near their school. Said it was turning the creek orange again. He told them to mind their business. Her knuckles whitened around the angel. The night they disappeared, Emily called me. Not panicked, but strange. She said, "Mom, we found where they're hiding it." Then the line went dead. I thought it was static. The police said she was just upset, that she'd disconnected. She pointed a trembling finger toward the map on the wall. They'd been mapping the old service, tunnels behind the school, for a science project. They called it the Labyrinth. Opening a closet, she revealed two identical backpacks hanging side by side, their straps stiff with age. The investigator unzipped one, revealing a tangle of earphones, a half-melted pack of gum, and a small cloth-bound notebook. The pages were filled with neat, systematic observations, water samples collected on specific dates, sketches of machinery near the mine's perimeter, and timestamps of strange vibrations felt in their home at night. The final entry, dated the day before they vanished, read, "Saw Hensley at the old pump house. He was with men in black trucks. They were loading something heavy, not rock. Too quiet for rock." Below it, in Sarah's handwriting, circled twice, "Project Echo?" Mrs. Vance pulled a folded letter from her cardigan pocket, the paper thin as onion skin. It was a notice from the Blackwater Ridge Mining Company, dated 3 days after the girls disappeared, offering a gesture of goodwill for their unfortunate family situation. A check for $5,000, signed by the mine's owner. "I never cashed it," she whispered, pressing the letter to her chest. It felt like blood money. The room held its breath, the dust motes swirling in the weak light, the untouched beds a silent accusation against the town's narrative. The official story of 2 troubled teens fleeing a small-town life dissolved in the weight of this preserved grief, the meticulous records of curious girls, and the chilling implication that their curiosity had led them into something far darker than youthful rebellion. The blue patch on the Polaroid, the check, the notebook entry. They weren't just artifacts. They were pieces of a puzzle the town had deliberately buried. A truth that had cost 2 lives and broken a mother. The air itself felt thick with the ghosts of what happened here, and the unspoken fear that the mine had not only taken the girls, but had woven their disappearance into its very fabric. The mine entrance yawned like a wound in the mountainside, the rusted chain-link gate sagging inward as if the earth itself had grown weary of holding back the darkness. Rainwater trickled down the rocky face above, carving new channels in the mud, but the ground just inside the gate was unnaturally dry, the soil packed hard and smooth as if recently trodden by boots. The investigator stepped over the broken chain, the metallic tang of wet iron mixing with the deeper, older scent of wet stone and decay that seeped from the tunnel mouth, a smell like cold breath exhaled from a tomb. The official closure notice, dated November 1993, hung crookedly on the gate, the paper water-stained but still legible, declaring the Blackwater Ridge mine abandoned due to structural instability and economic non-viability. Yet the path leading to the entrance told a different story. It wasn't overgrown, it was maintained. The undergrowth had been deliberately cleared for the last 20 feet. The dirt smoothed, the loose rocks kicked aside. No hiker would bother. No runaway teenager, fleeing in a panic, would have taken the time. The investigator knelt, brushing away a thin layer of fresh mud to reveal a single, deep tread mark, not the shallow, splayed pattern of a hiking boot, but the sharp, angular grooves of a heavy-duty work boot, the kind issued by mining companies. The mark was less than a week old, the mud still dark and moist at the edges. Moving closer, the investigator's headlamp cut a trembling beam into the throat of the tunnel, illuminating a world of oppressive silence. The beam caught the skeletal remains of an old head frame, its rusted metal bones silhouetted against the deeper blackness, and the faint, almost imperceptible vibration, humming through the soles of their boots, a low thrumming, like a distant engine, felt more than heard. It was the same vibration Mrs. Vance described in the twins' notebook, the one they'd felt in their home. The air inside wasn't just cold. It carried the sharp, acrid bite of machine oil and diesel fumes, layered over the damp stone, chemicals that had no business lingering in a supposedly abandoned site for 31 years. The investigator ran a gloved hand along the rough-hewn wall just inside the entrance. The rock face was damp, slick with condensation, but higher up, near the ceiling, a distinct dry patch was visible. Scraping away a thin film of grime with a pocket knife, they revealed not natural rock but smooth, painted metal, a section of ventilation ducting, recently installed, its edges sealed with fresh caulk that glistened under the beam. The official mine maps, obtained earlier from the county archives, showed no such ducting on this level. This was new, added after the closure. Further in, the beam swept over the cavernous main chamber. Collapsed timbers and rubble marked the official collapse zones from the 1993 closure report, but the path through them was too clear, too deliberate. It wasn't the jagged chaos of a natural cave-in. It was a narrow, winding trail, as if someone had carefully cleared a passage through the debris. The investigator followed it, the crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound besides the persistent, unsettling hum. Near a pile of shattered ore carts, something glinted dully. Kneeling again, they uncovered a small, discarded plastic container. The label long since faded, but the shape unmistakable. A standard-issue container for water sampling kits used by environmental agencies. The twins' notebook had detailed their efforts to test the contaminated creek. This container, however, was empty and clean, not coated in the rust-colored sludge they'd described. More importantly, its date stamp on the bottom, etched in tiny numbers, read 03-2024. 30 years after the mine's closure. Someone was still taking water samples here. The official narrative of abandonment and disuse crumbled further. Why sample water in a dead mine? Why maintain a path through rubble? Why install new ducting? The beam caught movement. Not human. A rat scurried across the path, disappearing into a dark alcove. But the alcove itself held the anomaly. Tucked behind a crumbling support beam, half hidden by a tarp, was a small, modern solar-powered monitoring device, its green LED blinking steadily. A quick scan with a handheld frequency reader confirmed it was transmitting a real-time data feed sent to an unknown receiver. The device was designed for environmental monitoring. Air quality, particulate matter, seismic shifts. The official story claimed the mine was a derelict hazard. This device suggested active, ongoing surveillance. The investigators' heart hammered against their ribs, the cold air suddenly feeling charged. This wasn't a forgotten ruin. It was a functioning, if clandestine, operation. The twins hadn't stumbled into a dead zone. They'd stepped into a living, breathing secret. The rusted gate, the dated closure notice, the archived reports, all were a facade. The mine wasn't closed. It was hidden in plain sight, its heartbeat still strong beneath the mountain, the hum vibrating up through the soles of the investigators' boots, a physical echo of the twins' final, cryptic words. We found where they're hiding it. The damp air, the chemical tang, the fresh boot print, the blinking green light. They weren't just details. They were evidence of a lie sustained for decades, a hidden world operating under the cover of the official story, and the chilling realization that whatever Project Echo was, it was still running. The forest outside might have tried to bury the truth, but the mine itself was actively guarding it, its dark mouth waiting, watching, breathing. The journal wasn't where it should have been. Not in the desk drawer, not tucked under the mattress, not with the other school books. It took the investigator 2 hours of methodical re-examination of the twins' room, cross-referencing the Polaroids from the shoebox with the room's layout, before their fingers brushed against a loose floorboard beneath. Emily's bed, the one with the faint, almost invisible scratch mark shaped like a pickaxe, matching the blue patch. The wood gave way with a soft groan, revealing a cavity lined with oilcloth. Inside, wrapped in a plastic bag sealed with electrical tape, lay a small black composition notebook, its cover stiff with age, the spine cracked from frequent handling. The investigator's breath hitched as they lifted it. The weight felt different from the textbooks in the desk, heavier with unspoken truth, colder than the damp air of the room. Opening it, the first pages were deceptively ordinary. A shopping list for school supplies, doodles of cartoon frogs, a half-finished poem about the mountain's sleepy eyes. But the deeper they read, the shift was palpable. The neat, parallel columns of Emily's looping script and Sarah's bolder, angular hand began to converge on a single, obsessive subject, the mine. Page after page detailed water tests conducted in the creek behind their school. The entries dated with meticulous precision. April 12, 1994. Creek water sample number 7. pH 3.2. Iron concentration 12 meterosel. Toxic level per EPA guide. Smell like rotten eggs, plus battery acid. Sarah's marginalia, in urgent red ink scrawled beside it. Hensley lied. Told Dad it was mineral. Run off. Liar, saw him dump something. Near pump house last night. Black barrels. Emily's counterpoint, in blue, was calmer but no less damning. Checked town records. Mine filed no activity. Report for Q1 1994, but creek flow increased. 30% after heavy rain on April 5th. Source? Not natural. The twins weren't just curious. They were conducting a covert investigation. Their science project a front for something far more dangerous. The sensory details were jarring in their intimacy. May 1st. Smelled diesel near the old service tunnel entrance. The labyrinth. Not the old generator, new like the trucks Hensley uses. Followed the sound. Saw lights. Men in hard hats but no mining gear. Carried cases. One case had a symbol. Blue patch with crossed pickaxe gear. Like the one on the mine sign, but different. No company name. A crude sketch filled the margin. The stylized pickaxe and gear, but the gear was incomplete. A single tooth broken off at the top. Below it, in Sarah's frantic scrawl, he saw us. Hensley, standing at the pump house. Didn't run, stared, like he knew. The investigator's gloved thumb traced the sketch. The broken gear tooth mirroring. The frayed edge of the actual patch found near the hidden pickup. This wasn't just observation. It was documentation of a moment of direct threat. The fear began to bleed through the ink. May 15th, Mom's been acting weird. Got a check from the mine. $5,000 for our trouble. She won't cash it. Says it feels like dirt. Hensley came by today. Said it's better if you stop asking questions. Said, we were upsetting the peace. Emily's entry, dated the same day, was shorter, the handwriting tight and controlled. He threatened Dad's job at the lumberyard. Said the mine controls everything, even the water. The next entry, dated May 20th, 3 days before their disappearance, was a single, stark line in both their hands, overlapping as if written simultaneously. They're hiding something big. Project Echo. Saw the name on a manifest near the pump house. It's not water they're testing. It's us. Below it, a separate, shaky note in Sarah's hand. As if added later. We found where they're hiding it. The old shaft behind the school. It's not sealed. They're using it. We need to tell someone. But who? The final entry, dated May 23rd, the day before they vanished, was written solely by Emily, the ink blotted as if by tears. Sarah thinks we should go to the sheriff. I'm scared. The lights were on again last night, deeper in the labyrinth. The hum is louder, like the mountain is breathing. We shouldn't have looked. They know we know. If something happens, tell Mom about Project Echo. Tell her it's not about the mine. It's about what's under it. The last word, it, was underlined 3 times, the pen tip piercing the paper. The investigators sat back on the dusty carpet, the journal heavy in their lap, the silence of the room now thick with the ghosts of 2 terrified girls. The official narrative of a teenage escape dissolved completely. This wasn't a story of rebellion or running away. It was a chronicle of children, stumbling into a conspiracy far larger and more dangerous than they could comprehend. The meticulous water testing, the documented encounters with Hensley, the specific, verifiable details of the diesel smell, the black barrels, the $5,000 check. These weren't the ramblings of troubled teens. They were evidence, recorded in real time by the victims themselves. The phrase Project Echo wasn't just a name. It was a key, and the broken gear tooth in the sketch was its lock. The mine wasn't just hiding their disappearance. It was hiding something else, something tied to the twins, fear that they're testing us. The journal wasn't just a record of their final days. It was a warning buried beneath their bed, waiting for someone to finally listen. The investigators' hands trembled as they closed the cover. The cold truth was no longer hidden in the earth or the forest. It was right here, in the smudged ink of 2 voices silenced too soon, the weight of their fear pressing down like the mountain itself. The search for the twins wasn't about finding bodies. It was about uncovering what they had died trying to expose. And Project Echo was just the beginning. The bar smelled of stale beer and damp wool, the kind of place where time moved slow as molasses and secrets settled, like dust on the cracked vinyl booths. Hank Miller sat hunched in the corner, a half-finished glass of cheap whiskey untouched before him, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the Formica table. He wasn't old, not by calendar years, but the mine had carved decades into his face, deep grooves around his eyes, the permanent squint of a man who'd spent 30 years staring into artificial light, the ashen pallor of someone who'd never seen the sun for more than a few hours a week. His flannel shirt, worn thin at the elbows, bore the faded ghost of the Blackwater Ridge Mining Company logo on the breast pocket. When the investigator slid into the booth opposite, Hank didn't look up. His gaze stayed fixed on the whiskey, his voice a gravelly rasp barely audible, over the tinny country music, crackling from the jukebox. "You shouldn't be here," he said, not a greeting, but a warning etched in fear. Not asking about the Vance girls, not asking about the mine. He finally lifted his eyes, and the investigator saw the tremor in them, the raw, unguarded terror of a man who'd lived with a secret too heavy to carry. "I worked the night shift when it all went down," he continued, his voice dropping lower, leaning in as if the shadows in the booth might be listening. "Hensley's right-hand man. Thought I knew the place like the back of my hand. Knew the pumps, the ventilation, the old service tunnels like the labyrinth." He spat the nickname with a bitter edge, confirming the twins' private term. But that spring '94, things changed. The foreman Hensley, he got tense, nervous, started locking doors we'd never locked before. Told us to stay off level 7, said it was unstable. But it wasn't. I'd been down there the week before, solid as bedrock. He took a shaky sip of whiskey. Not for taste, but for courage. Then the twins started poking around. Smart kids, too smart. Came down to the visitor center with their notebooks, asking questions about water discharge. Hensley told me to keep an eye on them. Said they were stirring up trouble with the EPA. Hank's hand shot out, gripping the investigator's wrist with surprising strength, his calloused fingers cold. "They weren't stirring up trouble," he hissed, his breath smelling of sour mash. "They found the real trouble, the night they vanished. I was on the night shift. Heard the hum, louder than ever, like the mountain was tearing itself apart. Then around 11 p.m., I saw Hensley's truck pull up near the old pump house. Not alone. 2 other vehicles. Black, no markings like government, but dirtier. Men got out wearing not hard hats but black helmets. Carrying equipment. Not mining gear. Boxes with wires, big ones. Looked like communication stuff. Or worse. His voice dropped to a whisper. Hensley met them. I saw the twins' pickup parked 100 yards off, near the service tunnel entrance. Lights off. They were watching. A single bead of sweat traced a path down Hank's temple. I tried to go out there. Thought maybe the girls were in trouble. Hensley saw me from the pump house. Waved me off. Then, one of the helmeted men stepped up to him. Gave him something, a small box. Hensley opened it. I saw the light hit his face. It was a watch. A fancy one. Like the kind rich men wear. Then he looked right at me, pointed to the mine entrance and mouthed, "Go back to work." Hank released the investigator's wrist, his own hand shaking violently. I went back. I told myself it was none of my business. 2 hours later, the hum stopped. Dead silence, like the mountain was holding its breath. Next morning, the girls were gone. The mine was closed. Hensley got promoted, got a nice house out near the lake, and I got a letter. He pulled a folded, grease-stained envelope from his inner pocket, unfolding it to reveal a single sheet of cheap paper. Typed, no signature. "You saw nothing. You know nothing. Forget the Vance girls. Forget Level 7. Forget Project Echo, or you'll be next. Management." He slid the letter across the table, his eyes darting to the bar door. "Project Echo," he rasped, the name heavy with dread. It wasn't about mining. Not coal, not ore. It was something else. Something deep. The humming? That was the machine. They buried it under the mountain, right where Level 7 was. Supposed to be. Hensley wasn't a foreman. He was a guard. For whatever odd they put down there. Hank pushed his whiskey away, untouched. I've carried that letter for 31 years. Every time I hear a rumble, every time the creek turns orange, I think of those girls. They didn't run away. They were silenced, because they saw what Echo was. And now you're asking questions. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping harshly on the floor. "Leave it alone," he pleaded, his voice cracking, "before they come for you too. That mine, it's not dead. It's waiting, and it remembers." He didn't look back as he melted into the gloom near the exit, leaving the investigator, alone with the damning letter and the chilling echo of his words. The machine, they buried it under the mountain. The cheap whiskey sat cold on the table, but the investigator felt only ice in their veins. The official story of abandonment was a lie. The mine was active, Project Echo was real, and Hank Miller, a man broken by fear, had just confirmed that the twins hadn't vanished into the wilderness. They'd vanished into the heart of a conspiracy, buried deep within the earth, guarded by men in black helmets and a foreman who took blood money. The bar's stale air suddenly felt thick with the presence of unseen watchers. The hum of the machine, Hank described, seeming to vibrate up from the very floorboards. The investigation was no longer about finding missing girls. It was about surviving the truth they'd uncovered. The county sheriff's office smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner, the fluorescent lights buzzing like trapped insects over the linoleum floor. Sheriff Dale Rigby sat behind his desk, a man whose bulk seemed to swallow the chair, his uniform straining at the buttons, the gold star on his chest polished to a cold gleam. He didn't offer a seat. On the desk lay a thin manila folder, the investigator's request for mine, closure records, the water sample container, and photocopies of the twins' journal entries. Rigby's thick fingers tapped a slow, deliberate rhythm on the folder, his eyes pale and watery, fixed on the investigator, with the practiced neutrality of a man accustomed to waiting for people to break. "You've been stirring up a hornet's nest," he began, his voice a low rumble that didn't match his slight frame. 31 years is a long time for a town to live with this. People have moved on. Families have healed. You come in here, digging up dirt, showing folks old photos of those girls. It's not healthy. He picked up a photo from the twins' room. The one showing them by the minecart with the figure in the hard hat. Kids get in trouble. They run. Sometimes they don't come back. Sad but true. Especially back then. The mine was a rough place. Hard times. The former mine manager, Carl Boren, sat stiffly in a plastic chair near the door. A man whose sharp, angular features and expensive-looking watch seemed out of place in the drab office. He wore a clean, pressed shirt, no tie, but the air of authority clung to him like sawdust. His gaze was colder than Rigby's, analytical, assessing the investigator like a problem to be solved. Blackwater Ridge Mining Company closed that site. Safely and legally, Bourne stated, cutting off Rigby's folksy preamble. His voice was smooth, practiced, the tone of a man who delivered this script 100 times. The closure report, filed with the state, is clear. Structural instability, unforeseen geological shifts. The safety of our workers and the community was paramount. We cooperated fully with all authorities. The Vance girls' disappearance was a tragedy, yes, but entirely unrelated. A personal matter, likely involving runaway behavior, as the original police report concluded. To suggest otherwise is not just reckless, it's slanderous to the company's legacy and the families involved. Rigby slid a printed email across the desk. This came in this morning, from Boren's lawyers, a cease and desist. They claim your investigation is causing undue distress to former employees and falsely implicating the company in criminal activity. They're threatening a lawsuit for defamation, emotional distress, invasion of privacy. You think you can afford that? He leaned forward, the chair groaning under his weight. You think your little YouTube channel can withstand a legal war? We're not some backwater town you can strong-arm with a camera and some conspiracy theories. This is real life. People's livelihoods are at stake. Reputations, my department's credibility. You push this, and you'll be the one facing consequences. Not the mine. He tapped the journal photocopy. This scribbling? Kids write nonsense. Imaginary adventures. You're reading too much into doodles and water samples. The creeks always run orange. Tannic acid from the leaves. Basic geology. Boren interjected, his tone shifting to one of faux concern. The $5,000 check offered to Mrs. Vance? A standard corporate gesture of sympathy for a grieving family. Common practice. She declined it. There's no impropriety. As for the so-called Project Echo mentioned in this diary, he snorted, a sharp dismissive sound. Fiction. Adolescent fantasy. The mine had no projects by that name. No records exist. Your witness, Hank Miller, a disgruntled former employee with a drinking problem, paid off years ago and living in the county shelter. His word against the documented history of a major corporation. It's not credible. And that new water sample container? A misdate. A manufacturing error. You're building a house of cards on wishful thinking and coincidence. The investigator remained silent, absorbing the pressure, the calculated dismissal. Then they pulled a single, high-resolution photograph from their own file. A close-up of the water sample container's bottom, the date stamped 03/2024 crystal clear. They placed it squarely in front of Boren. This was found inside the mine. Sheriff, less than a week ago. The mine was closed in 1993, 31 years. This container is dated March 2024. Explain that. They turned to Boren. The Twins' journal, dated May 20th, 1994. References a manifest near the pump. House is for Project Echo. Mrs. Vance received the $5,000 check 3 days after the girls vanished. The mine's official closure notice, dated November 1993, states the site was abandoned due to structural instability. Yet your own company's internal safety logs, obtained from the state archives under FOIA, show routine maintenance and equipment checks. Up to June 15th, 1994. The investigator slid another photocopy onto the desk, a page from a ledger. The dates and signatures unmistakable. That's 3 weeks after. The mine was supposedly sealed. How does a structurally unstable mine undergo routine maintenance? How does a closed site have active equipment checks? How does a closed site have water samples taken last month? The room went still. Rigby's tapping stopped, his face flushed, the practiced neutrality cracking. Boren's smooth facade faltered. A muscle twitched near his eye. He didn't look at the ledger, but his knuckles whitened where he gripped the armrests. That log could be a mistake, he said, his voice losing its smoothness, gaining a slight edge. Old records get misfiled. Human error. Human error, the investigator repeated, holding Boren's gaze. Like the error of a 1993 inspection sticker on the Twins' truck. Yet they supposedly took it to run away in 1994. Like the error of finding a $5,000 check from the mine company dated 3 days after the girls vanished, contradicting the runaway narrative. Or the error of a 2024 water sample container in a mine officially closed in 1993? They leaned forward slightly. The official story is full of errors, Mr. Boren. Errors that only make sense if the mine was never really closed. If Project Echo was real. If the Twins didn't run, but were silenced. Rigby stood abruptly, his chair scraping harshly. This interview is over. His voice was tight, strained. You're on thin ice. Pack up your evidence. Leave the county. Today, if you're not gone by sundown, I'll have you charged with harassment and trespassing on private property. Which the mine is, by the way, regardless of what you think you found. Inside, he avoided looking at the 2024 container photo. This case is closed. It was closed 31 years ago. Don't make me shut it for you. Boren rose, silently, adjusting his shirt cuff with a sharp, precise motion, his earlier composure replaced by a cold, watchful intensity. He didn't speak, but the unspoken threat hung heavier than Rigby's words. We are watching. We know where you are. Stop now. The air in the small office felt thick, charged with the unspoken power of the institution. The investigator gathered their files. The weight of the verifiable specifics, the dates, the stamps, the logs, a small, hard anchor against the wave of official pressure. The confrontation wasn't about truth, it was about power. And the mine's legacy, protected by men like Boren and Rigby, would do everything in its power to remain buried. But the 2024 date stamp glowed in the investigator's mind, undeniable, a tiny flame of proof against the suffocating dark of the official narrative. The pressure was immense, the threats real. But the numbers didn't lie. The mine was breathing, and it had just spoken through its own records. The county archives were a time capsule of forgotten bureaucracy, the air thick with the scent of decaying paper and the faint, metallic tang of aging ink. Sunlight filtered through grimy high windows, illuminated swirling dust motes, above rows of towering metal shelves groaning under the weight of decades of county records. The investigator's boots echoed too loudly on the linoleum floor, the only sound besides the rhythmic thump of a dehumidifier. Fighting a losing battle against the damp Appalachian air, they moved with deliberate slowness, gloved hands tracing the spines of thick, cloth-bound ledgers. The labels faded to near illegibility. Blackwater Ridge Mining Commissioner, Operations Logs, 1980-94. Water Quality Reports, 1990-1995. County Property Tax Filings. The official narrative of the mine's closure was a flimsy veneer, and here, in the quiet, unguarded heart of the system, the truth lay buried in ink and paper. The first contradiction surfaced almost immediately. The mine's official closure notice, filed with the state in November 1993, declared the site abandoned due to structural instability and economic non-viability, citing a catastrophic rockfall on Level 7 as the final trigger. Yet, flipping through the operations logs, dated entries from the mine's internal safety team showed routine activity after the closure date. November 15, 1993, Level 5. Ventilation system check, all operational. November 22, 1993, pump. House maintenance. Minor leak repaired. December 3, 1993, equipment inventory. 3 mining lamps, 2 hard hats, 100th cable reel logged as in use. The dates were precise. The signatures, including that of Carl Boren, then the mine manager, unmistakable. This wasn't abandonment. It was a carefully staged withdrawal, a phantom closure while essential systems remained active, maintained by men who'd signed off on the mine's supposed demise. The investigator's gloved finger lingered on Boren's signature, the ink slightly smudged, the name now a symbol of calculated deceit. Next, the water records. The twins' journal documented their testing of the creek behind their school, noting toxic iron levels and the smell of rotten eggs plus battery acid. The official water quality reports from the county health department, however, painted a picture of pristine compliance. April 1994, Blackwater. Creek sample, within EPA guidelines for iron content. No contaminants detected. May 1994, follow-up test. Results consistent with previous report. The dates aligned perfectly with the twins' entries, yet their data, meticulously recorded, including sample numbers and collection times, contradicted the county's findings. The investigator pulled the twins' photocopied journal page from their folder, laying it beside the official report. Emily's precise note. April 12, 1994, creek water sample. 7 pH 3 dose. Iron concentration 12 mRel. Toxic level per EPA guide. The county report for the same date. Sample ID BWC 41294. Iron 0.3 mRel. pH 6.8. The discrepancy wasn't just an error. It was a deliberate falsification. Someone had swapped samples, altered results, ensuring the mine's environmental violations remained hidden. The smell of sulfur and battery acid the twins described wasn't in their heads. It was being systematically erased from the record. The most damning discovery came in a seemingly innocuous ledger titled Blackwater Ridge Mining Coercier Discretionary Fund Allocations. It was thinner than the others, its spine less worn, suggesting infrequent use. The first entries were mundane. March 1993, 250 bor office supplies. April 1993, 75 Zyres, local charity donation. Then dated May 26, 1994, 3 days after the twins vanished. The entry changed. $5,000. Vance family. Goodwill gesture. The amount matched the check Mrs. Vance had shown them, the one she'd called blood money, but the ledger revealed a chilling detail the check alone couldn't. The line item beneath it, dated June 1, 1994, 7,500 Slater. H. Miller, severance, confidentiality agreement. Hank Miller, the witness who'd fled the bar in terror, who'd spoken of black helmets and the hum of the machine. This wasn't just a payoff. It was a silencing fee paid after the girls disappeared, directly linking the mine's management to the suppression of evidence and the intimidation of potential witnesses. The investigators' hands trembled as they turned the page, the brittle paper whispering like a confession. The next entry, dated June 15, 1994, sent a jolt of ice through their veins. 25,000 more. Project Echo, Phase 3 completion. Below it, a notation in a different, sharper hand. Funds allocated per DoD. Contract 74294ML. Project Echo. The phrase from the twins' journal. The name Hank Miller had uttered with dread was now etched in official company ledger entries. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a funded operation. The Department of Defense. The connection was undeniable. The verifiable specifics. The contract number. The precise date. Cutting through decades of obfuscation like a scalpel. This was the hidden ledger. The smoking gun buried in the archives, proving the mine's closure was a fiction. The twins' disappearance was an event tied to a classified military project, and the $5,000, check to the Vance family, was part of a coordinated cover-up. Further back, in a section marked Pre-Closure Asset Transfer, the investigator found the final piece. Dated October 28, 1993, 1 week before the official closure notice. A list of equipment was logged as transferred to Echo. Site. The items included 12 units of seismic monitoring array, model SMA-9, 3 units of subterranean communication relay, model SCR-7, 1 unit of high-energy resonance generator, model HERG-1. The HERG-1, the twins had described the hum that vibrated through their home, the sound Hank Miller called the mountain breathing. This was the source. The machine buried under the mountain. The ledger didn't specify where the equipment was transferred, only that it was to support Project Echo operations, but the date was critical. The mine was still technically operational when the equipment was moved, yet the closure notice claiming structural instability was filed just days later. The rockfall cited as the reason for closure was a pretext, a smokescreen for the removal of something far more valuable, or dangerous, than coal. The investigator closed the ledger, the worn cloth cover cool beneath their fingertips. The quiet of the archives felt suffocating now, the dust motes dancing like trapped spirits. The paper trail wasn't just a series of inconsistencies, it was a meticulously constructed web of lies, paid for with company funds and enforced through intimidation. The dates didn't lie. The signatures didn't lie. The DoD contract number didn't lie. Project Echo was real. It had been funded, equipped, and operated long after the mine was supposed to be dead. The twins hadn't run away. They'd stumbled into the heart of a military operation hidden beneath their town, a project that required their silence and the erasure of their evidence. The official story of budget cuts and structural failure dissolved completely, replaced by the cold, hard truth written in ink on decaying paper. The mine was a front, the closure a cover, and the disappearance of Emily and Sarah Vance a deliberate act of erasure by forces far more powerful than a small-town sheriff or a disgraced mine manager. The investigators' breath fogged the air, the weight of the ledger in their hands feeling like the weight of the mountain itself, holding secrets that had already cost 2 lives and were still being guarded. The search was no longer about finding what happened to the twins. It was about surviving the truth of what they'd found. The archive's silence was no longer peaceful. It was the silence of a tomb, built with paper and ink, and they had just found the key. The basement of the abandoned mine office was a tomb of forgotten industry, the air thick with the cloying sweetness of mildew and the sharp, acrid sting of decaying electrical insulation. Water dripped steadily from a cracked pipe overhead, each plink echoing like a metronome in the oppressive silence, marking time in a place where time had long stopped. The investigator's headlamp beam cut a narrow cone of light through the gloom, illuminating dust motes swirling. Above stacks of waterlogged ledgers and rusted filing cabinets, their drawers gaping like empty mouths. The floor was a treacherous mosaic of broken concrete, shattered glass and slick, blackened sludge that squelched underfoot. This wasn't the main office. It was the sub-level utility room, a space the official closure maps had omitted, accessible only through a collapsed service hatch, hidden beneath a tarp in the main office, the same hatch that bore the faint, fresh scuff marks of work boots noted earlier. The beam swept over a corroded electrical panel, its cover hanging askew, wires spilling out like entrails. Something glinted dully behind it, a sliver of plastic. Kneeling, the investigator pushed aside the tangled wires, the cold, damp metal sending a shiver up their arm. Tucked deep within the panel's recess, shielded from moisture and time by the very structure meant to conceal it, was a small, unmarked cassette tape. It wasn't the standard Norelco or Maxell variety. It was a heavy-duty, industrial-grade reel-to-reel cartridge. The kind used for field recordings by geologists or military survey teams. The plastic casing was thick, designed for harsh environments, and the label, though faded and water-stained, bore a single line of typed text in a stark, utilitarian font, Echo 7, 230594, 2247. The date, May 23, 1994, the time, 2247. The same date as Emily's final journal entry. The same night they vanished. The investigators' pulse hammered against their ribs, the steady drip of water suddenly sounding like a countdown. Retreating to the dry, relatively stable concrete platform near the entrance, they pulled a vintage Sony Walkman from their pack. A relic of the 90s, its battery compartment rattling with loose contacts, but functional. The cassette slid into the player with a soft metallic clunk. The whir of the motor was a strained protesting sound. The tape moving with the sluggishness of age, then silence. The investigator pressed play. A hiss of static filled the headphones, thick and layered, like the sound of wind through dead trees, punctuated by the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of the basement water. And then, a voice, young, female, trembling with fear but unmistakable. Sarah Vance, can't see anything. Emily, are you recording? It's so dark. The flashlight's almost dead. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. We shouldn't have come down here. This isn't the labyrinth. This is different. The walls are smooth, like metal, and the hum. It's coming from inside the walls now, louder. A sudden, sharp scrape of metal on metal echoed through the static. Did you hear that? Someone's above us. On the surface. I think they know we're here. Another voice, calmer but laced with underlying terror, cut through the static. Emily, keep recording. Sarah, if anything happens, this has to get out. Project Echo, it's not a mine. It's a machine. A big one, buried deep. The hum, it's not the pumps. It's the machine itself. Hensley, he's not a foreman. He's a guard. Forget them. A pause, filled only by the relentless hum, now audible even through the tape's distortion, a low, resonant thrumming that vibrated in the investigator's bones. We found the access shaft, the one behind the school. It's not sealed. It's a service elevator. We saw the doors open, just a crack. And the light, it wasn't electric. It was blue, like neon. And the smell, worse than the creak, like ozone and burning plastic. Sarah's voice close to tears. They're watching the school. I saw a black truck yesterday. No markings. Men in dark clothes, standing near the pump house. One of them, he had the blue patch, the broken gear, but it was different. The pickaxe, it was red. A choked sob. He looked right at me, like he knew I'd seen him. Like he knew about the journal. Emily's voice urgent, cutting through the fear. Listen carefully. The machine. It's called the HERG, High Energy Resonance Generator. We heard Hensley talking to the men in the black helmets. Said it stabilizes the fracture, but the tremors they're causing, they're not natural. They're testing. The water contamination, it's a side effect. They don't care about the town. They don't care about us. They just need the mountain quiet while the machine runs. A sudden, sharp crack echoed on the tape, like a rock hitting metal. Both girls gasped. Someone's coming down the shaft. The elevator? Sarah's voice rose to a panic. The tape! Hide it! In the panel, please! Emily's final words were a desperate whisper, almost lost in the rising static and the sudden, deafening crescendo of the machine's hum. If you find this, tell Mom, Project Echo is real. It's not about mining. It's about the... Her words were abruptly cut off by a burst of overwhelming static, a shrieking whine that overloaded the tape's circuitry. The recording ended with a final hollow click. The investigators sat frozen in the damp basement, the Walkman's headphones pressed to their ears. The silence after the tape's end more profound than the recording itself. The static had ceased, but the echo of the girl's terror lingered in the cold air, mingling with the real, physical vibration of the machine that still hummed beneath the mountain. The verifiable detail was undeniable. The timestamp on the tape, 3054-2247, proved the twins were alive and at the mine site at 10:47 p.m. on the night they supposedly ran away, long after the town's official story claimed they'd vanished. The official police report stated they'd left home around 8 p.m., taking the pickup truck, but the tape, recorded deep within the mine's hidden infrastructure, placed them underground, facing something far more terrifying than teenage rebellion. Hours after the alleged escape, the runaway narrative was a lie constructed in the space between 8 p.m. and 10:47 p.m. The details were too specific, too technical to be fantasy. The HERG machine, the blue light, the ozone smell. The red pickaxe patch, the DoD contracted project name. Sarah's fear about being watched at the school. Emily's desperate plea to hide the tape in the electrical panel. It was a confession, a final act of defiance. They hadn't run. They'd been hunted. They'd discovered the machine. The true purpose of Project Echo, and the men guarding it. The tape wasn't just evidence of their last moments. It was a blueprint of the conspiracy. Spoken in their own voices, buried for 31 years. The cold basement air felt charged. The dripping water now a reminder of time running out. The mine wasn't just hiding their bodies. It was hiding the machine that had silenced them. And the machine was still running. The investigator carefully ejected the cassette, the plastic casing cold and heavy with the weight of 2 lost lives and a truth too dangerous to be heard. The official story didn't just have holes. It had been built on a foundation of blood and lies, and the twins had left behind the key. The hunt was no longer for answers. It was for survival. The hum beneath the mountain wasn't just a vibration anymore. It was a heartbeat, and it was counting down. The descent into the hidden shaft behind Blackwater Ridge High School was a violation of the earth itself. The service tunnel the twins had, dubbed the Labyrinth, was a narrow fissure in the mountainside disguised as a crumbling storm drain, its entrance choked with decades of fallen leaves and gravel. Hank Miller, his face a mask of sweat and dread, led the way, his work boots scraping against the wet stone, the beam of his headlamp cutting a shaky path into the suffocating darkness. Behind him, the investigator followed, the cold metal of the descent rope biting into their palms. The geologist, Dr. Aris Thorne, bringing up the rear, his specialized seismic meter already registering the low-frequency thrumming that vibrated up through the bedrock. The air grew thicker, colder, smelling of wet clay and something else, a sharp, metallic tang like lightning, the ozone smell the twins had described on the cassette tape. The beam of light revealed walls not of natural rock, but of smooth, poured concrete, unnaturally straight and precise. The handiwork of engineers, not miners. The official mine maps had shown nothing here. This was a ghost passage, built long after the mine's supposed closure. The shaft dropped steeply, the rope groaning under their weight. Every foot downward intensified the vibration, no longer just felt through the soles of boots, but resonating in the chest cavity, a physical pressure that made breathing labored. Water seeped from cracks in the concrete, icy rivulets tracing paths down the walls, pooling on the narrow, uneven ledge they traversed. Hank stopped abruptly, his light fixed on a section of the wall where the concrete had fractured, revealing a network of thick, insulated cables snaking into the darkness. "Echo's veins," he whispered, his voice raw with fear. "They run deeper than the mine ever did." Dr. Thorne ran a gloved, "Hand over the cables," his seismic meter spiking. "This isn't standard mining infrastructure. These are high-voltage conduits, powering something massive." He pointed to a faint, almost invisible symbol etched into the concrete near the fracture. The stylized pickaxe and gear. But this time, the gear tooth was broken, and the pickaxe was painted a stark, unsettling red. The red pickaxe Sarah had mentioned. It was a marker, a warning. The path narrowed further, forcing them into single file, shoulders scraping the damp concrete. The hum crescendoed into a deep, resonant drone, a sound felt more than heard, a vibration that set teeth on edge and blurred vision. The investigator's headlamp beam caught a sudden glint of blue light reflecting off the whetstone ahead, not electric, but a cold, ethereal luminescence, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. The ozone smell intensified, stinging the eyes, carrying the acrid undertone of overheated insulation. Hank froze, his light sweeping the wall. "The elevator," he breathed, his voice barely audible over the drone. Embedded in the concrete was a seamless metal door, unmarked, its surface cool and smooth to the touch. No handle, no control panel. Dr. Thorne ran his hand over the surface. "Sealed, pressure-locked. This isn't an elevator for people. It's an access port." He pulled a small, high-frequency emitter from his pack, a device used for locating buried utilities. "It's responding to the machine's resonance frequency." He pressed a button, and the emitter emitted a low thrum that harmonized with the ambient vibration. With a near-silent hiss, a section of the door retracted, revealing an interior passage bathed in the same eerie blue light. The chamber beyond was vast, a cavernous space carved not by human hands, but by some immense force. The walls were sheer, polished rock glowing with the blue, luminescence emanating. From fissures running through the stone itself, the air crackled with static, lifting the hairs on their arms. In the center, dominating the space, stood the machine. It wasn't a mine shaft or a generator in any conventional sense. It was a colossal cylindrical structure of dark, non-reflective metal, easily 50 feet tall and 30 in diameter, embedded deep within the bedrock. Its surface was segmented by glowing blue lines of energy, pulsing in time with the deep thrum that now filled the chamber, a sound that vibrated the fillings in their teeth and pressed against their sternums. At its base, thick conduits snaked outwards, disappearing into the rock, while at the top, a complex array of antennae-like structures pulsed with a brighter blue light, sending visible waves of energy rippling through the air. This was the HERG-1, the high-energy resonance generator, the source of the hum, the tremors, the contaminated water. Project Echo wasn't a mining operation. It was an experimental military device buried under the mountain, using the earth itself as a conduit or a shield. Hank stumbled forward, his face pale in the blue glow, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his cheeks. "The humming," he choked out, pointing a shaking finger at the machine. "It's the mountain's bones breaking. They said it was stabilizing the fracture, but it's tearing the rock apart." Dr. Thorne was already at the machine's base, his seismic meter displaying chaotic readings. "The resonance frequency, it's not stabilizing anything. It's inducing microfractures in the bedrock. The water contamination is leaching from the shattered rock strata. They're not hiding a mine. They're hiding a seismic weapon." He ran his light over a small, recessed panel on the machine's surface, revealing a plaque. The investigator leaned in, the words etched in precise, military lettering, DoD contract. Summer 294 ml, Summer Project Echo, Phase 3, High Energy. Resonance Generator, HERG-1. Operation ongoing. The official story of closure, the $5,000 check, the falsified water reports, all were designed to conceal this. The machine was still active, still running, 31 years after the twins vanished. The investigator pulled the cassette tape from their pocket, the plastic casing suddenly feeling like a sacred relic. This was where the twins had been. This was what they'd discovered. The blue light, the ozone, the red pickaxe symbol on the axis, dots had all matched the tape's final moments. They turned the tape over in their gloved hand, the weight of the girl's last words pressing down. "We have to get this out," they said, their voice swallowed by the machine's drone. Hank nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the glowing fissures in the rock wall. "It's not just the machine," he said, his voice trembling. "Look," his beam illuminated a section of the wall where the blue light was strongest. Embedded within the fractured rock, barely visible, were shapes. Not rock formations, human shapes, silhouettes, frozen in the stone as if they had been turned to glass in the instant of the fracture. One was taller, with long hair. The other slightly smaller, reaching out. Emily and Sarah. The machine hadn't just silenced them. It had entombed them within the very bedrock it was fracturing. The twins weren't missing. They were part of the mountain. A deep, resonant crack echoed through the chamber, louder than the machine's hum. The ground lurched violently. Dust and small debris rained from the ceiling. The blue light flared, then dimmed erratically. "Seismic feedback," Dr. Thorne yelled over the sudden, violent vibration. "The machine's overloading! It's destabilizing the chamber." Another massive crack split the ceiling above them, a section of concrete shearing away, plummeting towards Hank. The investigator lunged, shoving him clear as the debris crashed onto the spot where he'd stood, sending up a choking cloud of dust. The main access shaft entrance, their only way out, was now partially blocked by the fallen rock. The machine's hum rose to a deafening shriek, the blue lights flashing erratically. The ground heaved again, throwing them to their knees. The investigator clutched the cassette tape, the only proof they had, the only way to get the truth out. Hank was on his feet, staring at the entombed shapes in the rock, a raw, keening sound escaping his lips. Dr. Thorne was frantically trying to stabilize his equipment, shouting over the din. The chamber was collapsing, the machine's uncontrolled resonance tearing the mountain apart from within. The blue light pulsed like a dying star. The escape route was blocked. The machine was failing, and the twins, frozen in the rock, watched as the earth itself began to swallow the truth whole. The investigator scrambled towards the blocked shaft, the weight of the cassette in their hand the only anchor in the disintegrating world, the hum of the dying machine a funeral dirge for the mountain, and the girls it had consumed. The rain that had threatened for days finally broke over Blackwater Ridge as the investigator stepped out of the county sheriff's office, the cold downpour soaking through their jacket within seconds, mirroring the icy dread in their chest. The warrant for unlawful entry, destruction of private property, and evidence tampering had been served an hour ago. Rigby's voice cold and final over the phone, but the tape was already out, hidden in the lining of a duffel bag, passed to a trusted journalist from a regional outlet before the warrant arrived. The cassette, the photos of the machine, the DoD contract number, the twins' journal entries, all digitized and uploaded to a secure server with a single instruction. If I don't check in by midnight, release it all. By dusk, Blackwater Ridge was a pressure cooker. The local diner, usually a haven of quiet conversations over coffee, was packed with townspeople hunched over laptops and smartphones, the glow of screens reflecting in wide, disbelieving eyes. A young man in a flannel shirt, his face pale, showed a neighbor a photo on his phone. The blue-lit chamber, the colossal machine, the faint, ghostly shapes frozen within the rock wall. "That's the school," he whispered, his voice cracking. "That's where Sarah Vance and I used to skip math. They buried it under us." The smell of burnt coffee and stale pastries hung heavy, but the air was charged with a new scent, fear, sharp and metallic. Outside, on the wet pavement, a cluster of women huddled under a dripping awning, tears cutting tracks through the rain on their cheeks. One held a faded photograph of the twins at a summer festival, her knuckles white. "They weren't running," she said, her voice raw. "They were fighting. For all of us." The regional news station's live feed went viral before midnight. The anchor, usually composed, stumbled over the words as the first images appeared. The 1994 pickup truck, the blue patch, the ledger entries showing the DoD contract. Then the audio, Sarah Vance's terrified voice, the hum of the machine, Emily's final, cut-off plea about the Herg. The anchor paused, visibly shaken, before reading the verifiable detail that silenced the town. The timestamp on the recording, May 23, 1994, at 10:47 p.m., directly contradicts the official police report, stating the girls left home at 8 p.m. and were last seen driving away. The location, deep within the mine's hidden infrastructure, confirms they did not run away. The screen cut to a reporter outside the abandoned mine entrance, where a small, growing crowd had gathered despite the rain. Sheriff Rigby and former mine manager, Carl Boren, have not yet issued statements, the reporter said, her hair plastered to her forehead. But county records obtained by our station confirm the $5,000 goodwill gesture payment to the Vance family was made 3 days after the girls vanished, matching Mrs. Vance's testimony. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The Blackwater Ridge High School board held an emergency meeting, parents demanding answers about the contaminated creek that ran behind the school. The tremors felt in classrooms. A local environmental group, armed with the twins' original water samples in the 2024 container found in the mine, filed an emergency injunction against the dormant mining company, citing ongoing environmental hazards. The county courthouse steps became a makeshift memorial, not just for Emily and Sarah, but for the town itself. Candles flickering in the rain, notes pinned to the wet stone walls. "We were poisoned. They lied to us. Project Echo is still running." Mrs. Vance stood silently among the crowd, her hands clasped around the porcelain angel from her daughter's room, the rain streaming down her face as if the sky itself was weeping for the 31 years of silence. Rigby's office became a fortress. The phone rang incessantly. Journalists, state police, the governor's office. Through the rain-streaked window, the investigator watched Boren's sleek black sedan pull up to the courthouse, his expression grim. He didn't enter. Instead, he conferred in hushed tones with Rigby in the back of a patrol car, their faces illuminated by the flashing blue lights. The investigator knew the threat was imminent. The warrant wasn't just about trespassing. It was about silencing the last witness. They ducked into a narrow alley, the cold rain now mingling with the sweat on their neck, the weight of the hidden camera in their pocket. Footage of the machine, the entombed shapes, the DoD plaque, a cold, hard lump against their thigh. The official narrative was shattered, but the machine beneath the mountain still hummed, and the men who protected it were desperate to reassert control. The public had the truth, but the truth was a live wire, sparking chaos through the town, igniting a fire that had smoldered for decades. The rain washed over the memorial candles, the flames sputtering but not dying out. The town was waking up, but the cost of that awakening was just beginning to be counted. The investigator pulled their collar tighter, the echo of Emily's final words, "Tell Mom, Project Echo is real," ringing louder than the sirens now wailing through the streets. The public reveal wasn't the end. It was the first crack in the dam, and the water was rising. The memorial wasn't held in a church or a park, but at the mine entrance itself, where the rusted chain-link gate hung broken, and the rain-slicked ground still bore the faint, ghostly tire tracks of the hidden pickup. 100 people stood in the damp twilight, their breath steaming in the cold mountain air, the silence broken only by the steady drum of rain on umbrellas and the low, mournful wail of a single bagpipe. No official ceremony, no politicians, no press, just the raw, unfiltered grief of a town finally allowed to mourn its stolen children. Mrs. Vance stood at the center, her frame small beneath a black wool coat, her hands clasped tightly around the porcelain angel, its chipped wings catching the weak glow of the candles arranged in a rough circle on the muddy ground. The candles weren't the usual white votives. They were small, glass-encased tea lights, their flames burning with an unnatural, pale blue hue, the exact shade of the luminescence that had emanated from the machine deep beneath the mountain. Someone had scavenged them from a camping store, a silent, haunting tribute to what the twins had seen. The investigator stood near the back, the damp wool of their coat heavy against their skin, watching as the community moved through the space with quiet reverence. A local geologist, Dr. Eris Thorne, placed a single vial of creek water, clear now, thanks to the emergency injunction, that had finally forced the mine's decontamination beside the candles. A high school teacher, her face lined with grief, laid down a stack of the twins' old biology textbooks, their pages filled with meticulous notes on water ecosystems, now water-stained but legible. Parents of children who'd attended school near the contaminated creek knelt to place small, hand-carved wooden stars on the ground, each inscribed with a name of a child who'd suffered unexplained illnesses over the years. The air carried the scent of wet earth, beeswax, and something sharper, the faint, metallic tang of the ozone smell the twins had described, lingering like a ghost of the machine still buried in the bedrock. Mrs. Vance stepped forward, the blue candles casting flickering shadows across her face. She didn't speak, but held up the porcelain angel, its delicate features glistening with rain. Then, with hands that barely trembled, she placed it gently at the base of a makeshift stone cairn someone had built from the mine's rubble. On the largest stone, a child's handwriting, painstakingly carved with a knife, read, "Emily and Sarah, you weren't runaways." A low murmur rippled through the crowd, not of words but of shared understanding, the weight of 31 years of silence finally lifting. The investigator noticed Hank Miller standing alone near the tree line, his head bowed, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. He met the investigator's gaze for a fleeting second, his eyes red-rimmed but clear, and gave a single slow nod. The fear was still there, but so was something new, relief. As the bagpipe's final note faded, the rain slowed to a drizzle, and the blue candles burned steadily, their flames unwavering in the damp air. The investigator stepped forward, not to speak, but to place something on the cairn, a small, laminated copy of the twins' journal entry dated May 23rd, the one. Hey there, everyone. Today we're talking about how to keep love fresh. Firstly, plan some surprise events for your partner to heat up your relationship on memorable days. Being honest and open with your partner about your feelings is also important. Remember, love isn't just about feelings. It's also about actions. If you truly care for someone, you'll take the necessary steps to keep that love alive and vibrant. So here's a tip. Don't hesitate to express your feelings of affection toward your partner. They need to feel cherished, too. Let's stay positive and keep love alive. Where Emily wrote, "We shouldn't have looked. They know we know." Beside it, they laid the faded blue patch with the broken gear, found near the hidden pickup. The patch, once a symbol of secrecy, was now a banner of truth. The crowd gathered closer, shoulders touching, hands finding hands, the collective weight of their grief transforming into a shared resolve. This wasn't just a memorial for two girls. It was the town's reckoning, a public exhalation of decades of fear and complicity. The investigator stood apart, watching Mrs. Vance trace the carved names on the stone, her fingers lingering on her daughter's. The official story was dead, buried alongside the lies that had sustained it. The truth, however, was heavier than stone. It carried the weight of a machine still humming beneath the mountain, a DoD contract still on the books, and a conspiracy that had already cost too much. But here, in the rain-soaked clearing, with the blue candles burning and the community finally united in grief, there was something else, a fragile, hard-won piece. The twins were no longer missing. They were remembered. They were honored, and for the first time in 31 years, their voices were heard. The investigator touched the pocket, where the cassette tape still rested, a physical echo of Emily's final whisper. The hunt was over, but the mountain's silence was no longer one of burial. It was a promise. The truth was out. The machine was known, and Blackwater Ridge would never forget. The rain stopped. The blue flames flickered, casting long shadows on the wet ground, and for a moment, the investigator felt the faintest vibration. In the earth beneath, their feet, not the machine's hum, but the heartbeat of a town finally coming to life. The Vance house felt hollow after the memorial, the silence heavier than the rain that still pattered against the windows. The investigator sat at the kitchen table, the last remnants of the community's shared grief, Lingering in the air, the faint scent of blue candle wax, the damp wool of discarded coats piled on a chair. Mrs. Vance moved through the rooms with a quiet, deliberate slowness, packing away the extra chairs, her hands brushing the surfaces as if reacquainting herself with the space that had held so much absence for so long. She paused at the twins' bedroom door, her fingers tracing the faded blue paint on the frame, then turned back to the investigator with a small, worn box in her hands. "They'd want you to have this," she said, her voice soft but steady, the raw edge of the past few days replaced by a weary resolve. Inside the box were the twins' belongings returned from the sheriff's office after the public revelation, textbooks, a few clothing items, the Polaroids from the shoebox. But nestled beneath them, wrapped in a faded floral cloth, was something new. Sarah's backpack, the one Mrs. Vance had kept hidden in the attic since the investigation began. Too painful to face. "I couldn't bear to open it," she whispered, placing it on the table. "Not until now." The backpack's fabric was stiff with age, the straps frayed. The investigator unzipped it carefully, the sound loud in the quiet room. Inside were the expected items: a biology textbook, a crumpled permission slip for a field trip, a half-used tube of lip balm. But as they lifted the textbook, something thin and rigid shifted at the bottom. A false compartment. Their fingers found the edge, peeling back a layer of reinforced lining sewn with near-invisible thread. Beneath it lay a single sheet of paper, folded multiple times, the edges softened by time and handling. It wasn't a journal entry or a school note. It was a photocopy, a grainy black-and-white image of a document header. At the top, in bold, blocky type, Department of Defense, Project Echo, Phase 4 Preliminary Briefing. Below that, a single line of text, typed but crossed out with a thick, angry line of red ink. Silas Station. Site confirmed stable. Initiate Protocol Delta. The rest of the page was blank, the critical details redacted. But the name stood out, stark and chilling. Silas. Mrs. Vance's breath caught. "I've never seen that before," she murmured, leaning closer, her finger hovering over the redacted line. Sarah kept her things so organized. I always wondered what else she was hiding. The name Silas meant nothing in Blackwater Ridge. No station, no landmark, no reference in the mine records or the DoD contract they'd uncovered. It was an echo from a larger architecture of secrecy, a name whispered in the dark corners of Project Echo that even the twins hadn't fully understood. The red ink crossing out the location wasn't just censorship. It was a warning, a directive to erase the trail. The investigator turned the photocopy over. On the back, in Sarah's bold, slanted handwriting, was a single phrase, written as if to herself, not the only one. Below it, in Emily's precise loops, a set of coordinates. Deg 3845.1. The investigator pulled out their phone, mapping the coordinates. The pin dropped in the middle of a vast, forested tract in northern Wisconsin, over 300 miles from Blackwater Ridge. No towns, no major roads, just a dense expanse of wilderness known as the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. The location was marked with a single generic notation: state land, restricted access. The twins had been mapping Project Echo, not just the mine, but its connections. This was the next piece. Silas wasn't a place in their town. It was a node in a network. Mrs. Vance picked up the porcelain angel from the table, turning it slowly in her hands. "They were so small," she said, her voice thick with memory. "I'd tuck them in, and Sarah would ask if the mountain was sleeping outside. Emily would say it was keeping watch. I thought it was just their imaginations." She placed the angel back on the table, her gaze fixed on the coordinates. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for everyone, even places they'd never seen. The weight of what the twins had uncovered settled between them, a truth that stretched far beyond the mountain, into forests and stations with names like Silas, where other machines might hum and other secrets might be buried. The investigator carefully folded the photocopy, the coordinates burning in their mind. The hunt for Emily and Sarah was over. They had found the truth, exposed the lie, and given the town its peace. But the machine beneath Blackwater Ridge was just one node. Silas was a doorway to something broader, a hidden infrastructure of power and secrecy that had operated for decades, erasing lives and poisoning land across state lines. The blue candles at the memorial might have burned for the twins, but the coordinates on the photocopy were a different kind of flame, a beacon pointing to a new frontier of darkness. As the investigators stood to leave, the floorboards creaked beneath their feet. But beneath the sound of settling wood, faint and insistent, came another vibration. Not the deep thrum of the Herg machine, but a different rhythm, slower, more distant, like a second heartbeat deep in the earth. It was the same vibration the twins had described in their journal, the one they'd felt in their home. It wasn't confined to the mountain. It was spreading. The machine in Blackwater Ridge hadn't been an anomaly. It was a signal, and Silas was listening. The investigator glanced back at Mrs. Vance, who was now folding the twins' school uniforms with gentle care, her face a mask of quiet sorrow. The open door wasn't just a place on a map. It was the realization that the silence the town had lived under for 31 years was only the echo of a much larger, darker truth. The mountains had spoken. Now, the forests would answer. The Vance house stood quiet under the late autumn sun, the skeletal branches of the rhododendrons casting long, delicate shadows across the porch. The investigator had returned not as a seeker of truth, but as a bearer of it. The weight of the past month settled not as a burden, but as a shared understanding. Mrs. Vance met them at the door, her eyes no longer hollow with the decades-old absence, but holding a fragile, hard-won piece. The porcelain angel sat on the kitchen table, a silent witness, as she poured tea into the same chipped mugs used for decades. The air carried the scent of cinnamon and the faint, lingering trace of the blue candles from the memorial, a ghost of the truth now, woven into the fabric of the home. The investigator placed the laminated copy of the twins' final journal entry beside the angel, Emily's desperate plea about the mountain, breathing, and the faded blue patch with the broken gear. These were no longer evidence. They were relics of a story finally told. Outside, the town moved with a different rhythm. The diner, once a place of hushed rumors, now buzzed with open conversation. A group of high school students sat at a corner table, poring over the twins' water sample data, their science teacher guiding them. On the courthouse steps, the memorial candles were gone, replaced by a simple hand-carved stone plaque. Emily and Sarah Vance, truth found, never forgotten. The $5,000 check, once a symbol of blood money, had been donated to the environmental group now monitoring the creek, its clear waters flowing past the school where the girls had once sat in class, unaware of the machine humming beneath their feet. The investigator walked through the streets, not as an outsider, but as part of the collective reckoning. A man at the gas station, one of the town council members, clasped their shoulder. "They were good kids," he said, his voice thick. "We failed them. Won't happen again." The shame was still there, but it was no longer buried. It was the foundation for something new. The final gathering wasn't planned. Word spread through the town like the vibration in the earth, a silent understanding. At dusk, families began walking toward the mine entrance. Not with fear, but with purpose. Children carried small blue candles. Elders brought vials of clean creek water. They formed a loose circle around the broken chain-link gate, the spot where the hidden pickup had been found, where the official story had begun its lie. Mrs. Vance stood at the center, holding the angel, the blue flames reflecting in her eyes. Dr. Thorne and Hank Miller stood beside her, no longer haunted but resolute. The investigator placed the cassette tape on the stone cairn, not as evidence, but as an offering. The last sound of Emily and Sarah's voices now part of the mountain's memory. No speeches were given. The town simply stood together, the rain having passed, the air crisp and clear. The blue candles burned steadily, their light a silent promise. In the quiet, the investigator felt it again. The faint vibration in the earth, the same one the twins had described, the one that had hummed through the Herg machine. But it was different now. Not the machine's thrum, but the steady, resilient pulse of a community that had faced the darkness and chosen to remember. It was the mountain's heartbeat, no longer hidden, but shared. The investigator looked at Mrs. Vance, her hand resting on the angel, tears tracing paths down her cheeks, but her posture straight, her gaze fixed on the mine entrance, not with fear, but with a quiet strength. The truth had cost lives, but it had also given the town its soul back. As the last candle flickered, the investigator turned to leave. Mrs. Vance touched their arm, holding out a small, folded piece of paper, the photocopy of the DOD document with the coordinates for Silas. "They'd want you to keep going," she said, her voice steady, "for the next ones." The investigator tucked it into their pocket, the weight of the coordinates a counterpoint to the lightness in the air. The hunt for Emily and Sarah was over, but the path forward was illuminated by their courage. Driving away, the investigator glanced in the rear-view mirror. The town was a cluster of lights against the darkening hills, the blue candles still glowing like a constellation of hope. The mountain watched, its secrets no longer buried, but held in the hands of those who refused to forget. The road ahead stretched into the Wisconsin wilderness. The name Silas, a whisper on the wind. Not an ending, but a continuation. The machine beneath Blackwater Ridge was silent, but the earth still spoke. And now they knew how to listen.